I came home with a woman. My wife yelled, "Who is she? What's going on?" We walked in silently and smiled. "Meet the wife of your boss and your lover," I said. My wife froze. You ever notice how marriages don't end with fireworks? They don't go out in some blaze of glory with thrown dishes and screaming matches that the neighbors call the cops about. Nah, that's Hollywood garbage. Real marriages die like houseplants nobody remembers to water, slow, quiet, and with just enough guilt to make you feel like crap when you finally notice the brown leaves. Mine started its death spiral in the kitchen on a Tuesday, which feels about right because Tuesdays are the emotional equivalent of gas station sushi. Nothing good ever happens on a Tuesday. She was doing dishes, which sounds domestic and sweet until you realize she was scrubbing the same plate for about 5 minutes like she was trying to erase evidence of a crime. I walked up behind her, reached out to touch her shoulder. You know, that casual thing you do when you've been married long enough that words feel optional. And she flinched. Not like a little twitch, but a full-body recoil like I'd just tried to hand her a live grenade. She pulled away so fast you'd think I was radioactive, like my touch came with a Surgeon General's warning and a list of side effects that included nausea, regret, and the sudden urge to fake your own death. "Not in the mood," she said, her voice flat as Kansas and about twice as boring. Again, that word hung in the air between us like a fart nobody wants to acknowledge, but everyone can smell. Not in the mood. The universal get-out-of-intimacy-free card that women have been playing since the invention of marriage itself. I should have printed it on a t-shirt and worn it around the house just to save her the trouble of saying it every damn day. No fight, no tears, no passionate argument about feelings or needs or any of that therapy talk nonsense that Dr. Phil gets paid millions to spew. Just cold air, colder silence, and a dish towel she folded with the kind of precision usually reserved for origami masters or people trying really hard not to make eye contact. She worked that towel like it was a Rubik's Cube, and if she got it just right, she'd unlock the secret level where she didn't have to acknowledge my existence. I stood there watching her, and I swear to God, I had this moment of crystal clear clarity that hits you like a brick to the skull. The kind of realization that makes you wonder if this is what people mean when they talk about enlightenment. Except instead of finding inner peace, you just find out you've been playing yourself for months. I thought, wow, love really does come with a warranty these days, doesn't it? Except mine apparently expired somewhere between "I do" and "I don't give a damn anymore." And nobody bothered to send me the renewal notice. I didn't argue. What's the point? Arguing with someone who's already checked out emotionally is like trying to reason with a brick wall. Except the brick wall has better listening skills and doesn't sigh dramatically every time you open your mouth. So instead, I just stood there like an idiot, hands at my sides, watching my wife treat basic human affection like it was some kind of communicable disease she might catch if she got too close. Right then and there, I wrote myself a mental note, the kind that burns itself into your brain in neon letters you can't ignore even if you tried. Stop reaching for people who treat your touch like a tax. Stop begging for crumbs of affection from someone who acts like giving you basic human decency is equivalent to donating a kidney. Stop playing yourself, Mason, because you're better than this discount bin version of love they sell at the marriage clearance sale. That night, lying in our bed that felt more like a demilitarized zone than a place of intimacy, I stared at the ceiling and listened to her breathe on the other side of our king-sized relationship graveyard. She was facing away from me, of course, because God forbid we accidentally make eye contact in the dark and have to acknowledge that we were two people slowly suffocating under the weight of pretending everything was fine. The space between us felt like the Grand Canyon, except less scenic and more depressing. And that's when it hit me, the plan. Not some dramatic revenge scheme involving burning her clothes or slashing tires or any of that Psycho X nonsense that lands you in jail or on a daytime talk show. Nah, I'm classier than that. More calculated. I started planning my quiet revenge right there in the dark, and let me tell you something. Quiet revenge is the best kind of revenge. It's the aged whiskey of payback, smooth, sophisticated, and it only gets better with time. I wasn't going to yell or cry or beg her to love me like some pathetic rom-com protagonist who thinks grand gestures fix fundamental incompatibility. I wasn't going to chase someone who clearly didn't want to be caught. I was going to do something way more devastating. I was going to stop caring. I was going to reclaim my dignity, my sanity, and my damn self-respect, and I was going to do it so smoothly, she wouldn't even see it coming until it was too late. See, most people think revenge is about hurting the other person, making them feel the pain you felt, evening some cosmic score like life's a basketball game and you're down by 20 points. But that's amateur hour. Real revenge, the kind that actually means something, is about becoming so completely unbothered, so thoroughly moved on, so absolutely fine without them that their absence becomes irrelevant. It's about reaching a point where they could walk back in your life and you'd feel nothing. Not anger, not sadness, just a mild, "Oh, it's you," like they're the mailman dropping off bills. I rolled over, pulled the blanket up, and smiled in the dark. Not a bitter smile or a sad smile, but a genuine, I just figured out the cheat code to this video game kind of smile. Tomorrow, I'd start making moves. Small ones at first, nothing she'd notice right away because she was too busy not noticing me anyway. But they'd add up. They'd compound like interest on a savings account I'd been neglecting for way too long. The flinch before the fire, that's what this was. That moment when you pull your hand back right before you touch the hot stove because your survival instincts kick in and scream, "Abort mission, dumbass." She flinched away from me tonight. Yeah, but I was about to flinch away from this whole dying marriage before it burned me any worse than it already had. And the best part? She had no idea the clock had just started ticking. The next morning, I woke up with the kind of clarity that only comes from a full night's sleep next to someone who pretends you don't exist. It's liberating in a weird way, like finally admitting to yourself that the restaurant you've been defending for years actually has terrible food, and you've just been lying to yourself because you didn't want to admit you wasted all that time and money. I rolled out of bed, grabbed my phone, and decided that today was the day I'd stop playing house with someone who clearly moved out emotionally about 6 months ago, but forgot to tell her body to follow. I made breakfast. Real breakfast, not that grab a granola bar and run garbage we've been doing for months. I'm talking eggs, bacon, toast, the whole production that makes your kitchen smell like someone actually gives a damn about starting the day right. She wandered in around 7:30 wearing that ratty purple robe that had seen better days sometime during the Bush administration, the first one, probably. Her hair was doing that thing where it defied gravity and logic simultaneously, and she had her phone clutched in her hand like it was a life preserver, and she was drowning in a sea of our failed marriage. "Morning," I said, sliding eggs onto a plate with the kind of domestic competence that would make those cooking show hosts weep with pride. I even folded the bacon into a little smile shape because I'm petty like that and wanted to show her what happiness looked like since she clearly forgot. She grunted, actually grunted, like some kind of cave person who just discovered fire and wasn't impressed. She grabbed her coffee, which I'd made, by the way, because I'm a saint, and scrolled through her phone with the intensity of someone either planning world domination or shopping for throw pillows online. With her, it could honestly go either way. "So," I said, sitting down across from her with my own plate, "I was thinking we could do something Friday night. Maybe that Italian place you like? The one with the breadsticks that are basically just butter delivery systems." I was testing the waters, seeing if there was any sign of life in this relationship or if I was basically married to a really expensive roommate who hogged the bathroom. She didn't even look up. "Can't do Friday night. I'm busy," she said, her voice flat as a pancake that someone left on the griddle too long. Busy. That magic word that means absolutely nothing and everything at the same time. Busy with what, exactly? I wanted to ask. Busy folding lies into neat little squares and stacking them in whatever dark corner of your conscience you keep that thing? Busy pretending our marriage isn't circling the drain like hair in a shower that needs cleaning? Busy with what? I asked anyway, because apparently I enjoy pain and redundant conversations. "Groceries," she said, like she'd just dropped some classified government intel, and I should be impressed by her commitment to national security through produce shopping. "Groceries? On a Friday night. At what, 7 p.m.? Who does groceries on Friday night unless they're either lying or have the social life of a lint roller?" I wanted to call her out right there, wanted to say something like, "Really, groceries? That's the best you could come up with?" But I didn't. Instead, I just nodded and took a bite of my eggs, which suddenly tasted like disappointment with a side of, what am I doing with my life? That's when I made my second executive decision in less than 24 hours. I stood up, grabbed my plate, and said, "You know what? I'm moving to the guest room." She looked up for the first time all morning, and I could see the little wheels turning in her head trying to figure out if this was a problem or a convenience. What? What? Because sharing a bed with someone who acts like I've got the plague seems kind of pointless, don't you think? I said it calm, no drama, just stating facts like I was reading the weather report. Plus, new arrangement starting today. Your bills, my bills, shared list for house stuff. I'm not your wallet with legs anymore. Her face went through about 15 emotions in 3 seconds. Surprise, anger, confusion, and what I think might have been relief, though she'd rather eat glass than admit that. That's so dramatic, Mason, she said, pulling out that word like it was some kind of trump card that automatically won arguments. No, honey, I said, putting my plate in the sink and turning to face her with the kind of smile you give someone when you're done playing their games. Titanic was dramatic. The ship sank, people died. Leo couldn't fit on that door even though there was clearly room. That was dramatic. I gestured between us like I was a game show host revealing the grand prize of mutual dysfunction. This is just accounting. This is me finally balancing the books on a relationship that's been operating in the red for way too long. She opened her mouth to say something. Probably something about how I was being unreasonable or difficult or whatever adjective she'd picked up from her weekly brunch crew, who all thought their husbands were the problem too. But I was already walking away, coffee in hand, dignity somewhat intact, heading to the guest room to start my new life as the world's most organized, separated but still technically married man. At work that day, I must have looked different because my buddy Jerry took one look at me in the break room and said, "You look like a man who just signed a peace treaty with his sanity." Jerry's one of those guys who's been divorced twice and somehow came out the other side more well-adjusted than most people who've never been married. He's like a war veteran, but for relationships, and his advice usually involves bourbon and brutal honesty in equal measures. Something like that, I said, pouring myself what had to be my 4th coffee of the day, which probably wasn't healthy, but neither was my marriage, so we were all making questionable choices here. She finally push you over the edge? Jerry asked, leaning against the counter with his own mug that said, "World's okayest employee," because Jerry understood the power of managing expectations. More like I finally realized I was standing on the edge holding her hand while she was trying to figure out how to push me off without getting blamed for it. I said, "So I just let go." Jerry nodded slowly, like I'd just shared some profound wisdom instead of just basic self-preservation. That's growth right there, man. Most guys hang on until they're nothing but a shell of themselves, walking around like zombies in their own lives. You're getting out before you need a support group and a prescription. He wasn't wrong. I could feel it already. That lightness that comes from finally making a decision instead of just floating in limbo, hoping things magically fix themselves. Hope is a terrible strategy, by the way. Hope is what you do when you're too scared to actually change anything. So you just wish really hard and pretend that counts as effort. Guest room, separate finances, and I'm done being her emotional punching bag, I said, ticking off my new boundaries like I was reading a grocery list, which felt appropriate given her Friday night plans. "Good man," Jerry said, raising his mug in a toast. "Welcome to the land of the living. It's pretty nice here. We have standards and self-respect. You're gonna like it." I clinked my mug against his and took a sip of coffee that somehow tasted better than it had 5 minutes ago. Maybe it was the caffeine finally kicking in, or maybe it was just the taste of freedom mixed with French roast. Either way, I was already feeling like a different person than the guy who'd reached for his wife's shoulder last night only to get treated like a biohazard. That night, I set up the guest room properly, my clothes in the closet, my books on the nightstand, my phone charger within reach. It felt like moving into a studio apartment inside my own house, which was depressing and liberating at the same time. She didn't say anything about it, didn't even acknowledge the change, which told me everything I needed to know. I lay there that night in my new bed, staring at a different ceiling, and realized something important. I wasn't sad. I was relieved, and that relief tasted better than any fake reconciliation ever could. Saturday rolled around like it had nowhere better to be, and apparently we had plans I'd completely forgotten about because my brain had been too busy processing the dumpster fire that was my marriage. Tom and Dana's barbecue. The annual summer thing they did where everyone pretended their lives were Instagram perfect while drinking beer that cost more than it should and eating burgers that were somehow always slightly undercooked in the middle. I would have bailed, honestly. But my wife informed me at 10 in the morning that we were going and that I should try to be social for once, which was rich coming from someone who'd been treating me like furniture for the past 6 months. We drove there in silence, which had become our default setting lately. The kind of silence that's so thick you could cut it with a knife, bottle it, and sell it as essence of failed marriage at one of those fancy stores where everything costs too much and smells like lies and lavender. She stared out the window like the passing scenery was the most fascinating thing she'd ever seen, and I focused on the road while mentally calculating how long I had to stay before it became socially acceptable to fake a work emergency. Tom and Dana's place was exactly what you'd expect from a couple who made doing brunch their entire personality. Perfectly manicured lawn, string lights that probably cost more than my first car, and a grill that looked like it could double as a spaceship if Tom ever decided to abandon suburban life and explore the cosmos. There were already about 15 people there, all holding drinks and laughing at jokes that probably weren't that funny, but sounded hilarious after 3 beers and the collective agreement to pretend everyone's life was going great. Mason, hey buddy, Tom called out, waving a spatula like he was directing traffic. Tom was one of those guys who wore cargo shorts year-round and thought saying living the dream was a personality trait. Nice enough guy, but about as deep as a kiddie pool. Hey Tom, I said, forcing a smile that felt like it might crack my face. My wife had already disappeared into the house with Dana and 2 other women whose names I could never remember, but who all seemed to share the same haircut and opinion about everything. I grabbed a beer from the cooler, something craft with a label that looked like it was designed by someone who took a lot of mushrooms, and planted myself near the grill where at least I could look occupied. Jerry was there too, because apparently the universe knew I'd need backup, and he gave me a knowing nod that said, "I see you're in hell, hang in there." Everything was fine for about 45 minutes. I made small talk with some guy named Brad or Chad or something equally douchey who worked in finance and wouldn't shut up about his boat. I nodded in the right places, laughed when it seemed appropriate, and generally played the part of normal functioning human at social event. Then my wife came back outside with her little entourage, and I could tell by the look on her face that she was about to do something that would make me regret not faking that work emergency. She was holding a wine glass, her third, if I was counting correctly, which I was, and had that particular smile that women get when they're about to throw someone under a bus, but make it sound like a joke. I've seen that smile before. It never ends well. "So Mason's been going through a bit of a phase lately," she announced to the group, her voice carrying across the patio like she was narrating a nature documentary about an endangered species. Everyone's attention shifted to me like I was suddenly the main attraction at a zoo nobody asked to visit. I felt my jaw tighten, but kept my face neutral. "Oh yeah," I said, taking a sip of my beer and praying for a meteor strike. "Yeah. He's gotten really into self-help stuff," she continued, doing this little laugh that was supposed to sound affectionate, but came out condescending. "Reading all these books about boundaries and self-care and feelings. It's very..." She paused, searching for the word like she was picking out produce. "Emotional. He's become very emotional." A few people chuckled, that uncomfortable laugh people do when they don't know if something's funny or if they're witnessing a murder in slow motion. Jerry looked at me with wide eyes that clearly said, "Abort, abort, abort." But I was already past the point of no return. "He's in a self-help phase," she said again, really driving it home now. Bless his heart. And there it was, bless his heart, the Southern woman's way of saying, what a pathetic loser, while maintaining plausible deniability. She might as well have patted me on the head and given me a participation trophy for trying to have basic human dignity. Something in me just snapped. Not in a dramatic, throw things kind of way, but in a quiet, I'm done with this performance kind of way. I started laughing. Really laughing. The kind of genuine laugh that comes from the absurdity of realizing you've been playing yourself, and everyone just watched it happen in real time. Everyone stared at me like I'd just started speaking in tongues. My wife's smile faltered, probably because this wasn't the reaction she'd expected. She wanted me to shrink, to look embarrassed, to prove her point about me being too emotional or whatever narrative she was selling to justify treating me like garbage. Instead, I stood up, set my beer down on the table with the kind of deliberate care you use when you're about to do something you can't take back, and smiled at Tom and Dana. "Tom, Dana, thanks for the burgers," I said, my voice calm and clear. "They were great. Really great." But my therapist. Yeah, I have one of those now. Isn't that wild? My therapist says I shouldn't eat where I'm disrespected. Something about digestion and stress. Very scientific. The patio went so quiet you could hear someone's ice cubes melting 3 yards away. Tom looked like he wanted to crawl into his fancy grill and become one with the charcoal. Dana's mouth was literally hanging open, catching flies and regrets. My wife's face went through more colors than a sunset. Mason, don't be dramatic, she hissed, which was apparently her favorite word lately, like she'd bought it in bulk from some Costco of manipulative phrases. Dramatic? I said, turning to look at her with the kind of calm that comes from finally being done with someone's bullshit. Drama's what happens when you mix boredom with bad manners. I gestured around at the assembled crowd who were all pretending they suddenly found their shoes fascinating. This is just me having standards. Novel concept, I know. I grabbed my keys from my pocket and started walking toward the gate. Behind me, I could hear my wife saying something about me being ridiculous, about how I was embarrassing her, about how I was making a scene. But here's the thing about being called dramatic by someone who's been staging a one-woman show of emotional manipulation for months. It loses its power real quick. Mason, wait, she called out, her voice sharp with embarrassment and anger. I turned around one last time, right at the gate, and looked at her standing there on Tom and Dana's perfect patio with her wine glass and her audience, and her carefully constructed image of being the reasonable one in our marriage. You know what's dramatic? I said, publicly humiliating your husband at a barbecue because you're too much of a coward to just admit you checked out of this marriage months ago. That's dramatic. Me leaving? That's just self-respect. Learn the difference. Then I walked out, leaving her holding a paper plate loaded with potato salad and her pride, both of which were probably going to be hard to swallow. I could hear the murmur of confused voices behind me. People probably asking if I was okay, if we were okay, trying to figure out what just happened and whose side they were supposed to take in whatever divorce announcement just got broadcast at their nice suburban barbecue. I got in my car, started the engine, and sat there for a second, hands on the steering wheel, waiting for the regret to hit me. Waiting for that feeling of, oh God, what did I just do, that usually follows any public confrontation. But it never came. Instead, I felt lighter, like I'd just put down a backpack full of rocks I didn't realize I'd been carrying. My phone buzzed. Jerry, dude. That was the most badass thing I've ever seen. You good? Me. Never better. That's probably a lie, but I'm working on it. Jerry, beer later? Me, absolutely. I drove home alone, windows down, radio playing some song I didn't know the words to but hummed anyway. And somewhere between Tom and Dana's place and my driveway, I realized something important. I wasn't her background extra anymore. I wasn't the supporting character in her story, the husband prop she could mock for cheap laughs while her friends nodded along. I was the main character in my own life now, and that felt pretty damn good. A few days after the barbecue incident, which had apparently made the rounds in our social circle faster than a celebrity death hoax, I was driving home from work when I saw it. Her car. That silver SUV she'd insisted we needed because apparently sedans were for people without ambition, or whatever the car salesman had convinced her of while I stood there wondering why we were dropping 40 grand on a vehicle that would spend most of its life shuttling one person to Target and back. It was parked outside Catalyst Coffee, this pretentious place downtown where they charged $7 for coffee and acted like they were doing you a favor by serving it in a mug that looked like it was made by someone's nephew in pottery class. Not her usual spot. She was a Starbucks girl through and through, the kind who ordered drinks with so many modifications the baristas probably drew straws to see who had to take her order. So seeing her car there was already weird, like spotting a vegan at a steakhouse or a politician telling the truth. I should have driven past. I should have minded my own business and gone home to my guest room and my new life of peaceful separation. But here's the thing about marriage. Even when it's dying, even when you're pretty sure it's already dead and you're just waiting for someone to call time of death, there's still this sick curiosity that makes you want to know. Like watching a car crash in slow motion. You know it's going to be bad, but you can't look away. I pulled into a spot across the street, far enough away that I wasn't obvious, but close enough to see through the massive windows that hipster coffee shops apparently require by law. And there she was, sitting at one of those reclaimed wood tables that probably cost more than my first apartment's rent, laughing. Actually laughing. The real kind. Not that polite chuckle she'd been giving me for months that sounded like someone remembering how laughing was supposed to work, but forgetting why. She wasn't alone. There was a guy sitting across from her. Mid-40s, probably, with that distinguished gray-at-the-temples thing that men apparently get to have, while women are expected to die away any evidence of aging. Nice watch. I could see it glinting from across the street, the kind of watch that screams, "I make six figures and want everyone to know it." Decent suit, though he'd taken off the jacket and rolled up his sleeves like he was in some cologne commercial. Overall, he looked like every middle management douchebag who's ever existed, the kind of guy who says things like "circle back" and "touch base" unironically. And my wife was eating it up like it was the last meal on earth. She leaned forward, touched his arm, laughed at something he said. He smiled, that smug smile men get when they think they're clever, and said something back. Then she did something that made my blood run cold in a way that surprised me, considering I thought I was past caring. She brushed his sleeve, her fingers lingering there like a cat marking territory, slow and deliberate and intimate in a way that made it crystal clear this wasn't their first coffee date. I sat there in my car, hands gripping the steering wheel, watching my wife flirt with some random guy in a coffee shop, like she was auditioning for a role in a movie about terrible people making terrible choices. Part of me wanted to storm in there, make a scene, flip a table, do something dramatic that would feel satisfying for about 30 seconds before the cops showed up. But I didn't, because I'm not an idiot, and more importantly, I'd learned something important over the past few days. Information is power, and revenge is a dish best served with evidence and a side of patience. So instead of confronting them, I did something way more useful. I waited. They talked for about 45 minutes, though it felt like 6 hours. At one point, he reached across the table and held her hand, and she let him, smiling like she'd just won something. The barista probably thought they were the cutest couple ever, having no idea she was watching someone's marriage get cremated in real time over $7 lattes. Finally, they got up to leave. He paid. Of course he paid, probably trying to impress her with his fancy credit card that definitely had rewards points he bragged about. They walked out together, and here's where it got interesting. They didn't kiss, didn't hug, just did that awkward shoulder touch thing that people do when they want to be affectionate, but are aware they're in public and one or both of them might be married to someone else. He walked to his car, a black BMW, naturally, because apparently everyone in this story drives a vehicle that costs more than common sense would suggest. She walked to hers. They waved at each other like teenagers after a first date, all giddy and stupid, and then they drove off in opposite directions. I followed him, not her. I already knew where she was going. Probably home to continue pretending she spent Friday nights doing groceries and living a totally normal life. No, I wanted to know who this guy was, where he lived, whether he was married, whether there was a Mrs. Watch guy sitting at home wondering why her husband was late from work again. I kept a few cars back, following him like I was in some kind of low-budget spy movie. He drove through downtown, took the interstate for about 10 minutes, then exited into one of those neighborhoods where every house looked like it belonged on a magazine cover, and every lawn looked like someone measured the grass with a ruler. Old money neighborhood. The kind of place where people had HOAs with actual power and probably held meetings about what color you could paint your mailbox. He pulled into a driveway of this massive colonial-style house that probably had more bathrooms than most people have rooms. White with black shutters, perfectly maintained garden, double garage, the whole suburban dream package. I parked down the street, far enough away that I wasn't obvious, but close enough to see what happened next. And then she appeared. A woman came out of the house, elegant, maybe late 30s, wearing yoga pants and a cardigan like she'd just come from teaching a class on how to be effortlessly put together. She had this calm energy about her, the kind of woman who probably volunteered at charity events and made homemade cookies that actually tasted good. Her hair was pulled back in a ponytail, and she was smiling as she walked up to the car. He got out, and she kissed him. Not a peck on the cheek. A real kiss. The kind of kiss you give someone you've been married to for years and still actually like. She said something. I couldn't hear from where I was parked, but her body language read happy, comfortable, completely unaware that her husband had just spent 45 minutes flirting with another woman over overpriced coffee. I sat there watching them, and I felt this weird smile spread across my face. Not a happy smile. More like the smile you get when you're playing chess and you suddenly see 5 moves ahead and realize you're about to win. Oh, this just got Netflix-level messy, I said out loud to my empty car. I pulled out my phone and started taking photos. Clean evidence. The house number clearly visible. His license plate. A few shots of him and his wife together looking all domestic and blissful. Nothing creepy or illegal. Just documentation that Mr. Fancy Watch had a whole entire life here. A whole entire wife who probably had no idea he was out there collecting side pieces like they were Pokemon cards. I didn't want revenge yet. Not the messy, immediate kind where you blow everything up and then have to deal with the fallout before you've even planned your exit strategy. No, I wanted choreography. I wanted this to be beautiful. I wanted every move planned out so perfectly that when it all came crashing down, nobody could say I acted out of anger or spite. They just have to acknowledge that I played the game better than anyone else at the table. See, most people think revenge is about destruction, about making the other person hurt as much as you hurt. But that's amateur hour. That's emotional thinking. That's the kind of revenge that gets you in trouble and doesn't actually make you feel better. Real revenge, the kind that actually means something, is about precision. It's about gathering all the pieces, understanding the whole board, and then making your move when everyone least expects it. I sat there for another 20 minutes, watching them through their kitchen window like the world's most justified stalker. They were cooking dinner together, laughing, looking like a commercial for whatever the hell normal people sell when they pretend their lives are perfect. She didn't know. The wife. Mrs. Watchguy had no clue that her husband was out there building a backup plan in case his current life got boring. And suddenly I had this thought that hit me like lightning. I bet my wife doesn't know he's married either. I bet Mr. Fancy Watch fed her some line about being divorced or separated or single, because guys like him always do. They're not just cheaters. They're liars who cheat and then lie about the cheating, like some kind of awful Russian nesting doll of deception. I took a few more photos, made note of the address, and then drove home with the kind of satisfaction that comes from knowing you're holding all the cards and nobody else has even realized the game started. The dance was about to begin, and I was going to choreograph every single step. The next day, I woke up with the kind of purpose usually reserved for people who found religion or started pyramid schemes. Except my mission was way more satisfying than selling essential oils to my friends or pretending I'd been saved. I had information, I had evidence, and I had a plan that was either going to be brilliant or land me in some kind of ethical gray area that would make my therapist earn her hourly rate. I spent the morning at work pretending to care about spreadsheets and quarterly reports while actually using my detective skills, which apparently I had, who knew, to figure out who Mr. Fancy Watch really was. A little LinkedIn stalking, some cross-referencing with the address I documented, and boom, Derek Morrison, Senior Vice President of Operations at Hutchinson and Reed Financial Services. Married to Mara Morrison for 12 years. 2 kids, based on the family photos on his Instagram that he probably should have made private if he was going to be out here collecting affairs like baseball cards. And here's the kicker that made me literally laugh out loud at my desk, causing Janet from accounting to look at me like I'd finally snapped. Hutchinson and Reed Financial Services. My wife worked there, in marketing, which meant Derek Morrison wasn't just some random guy. He was her boss, or at least in her chain of command. This wasn't a chance meeting at a coffee shop. This was workplace affair territory, which was both cliché as hell and absolutely perfect for what I was about to do. By lunch, I had Mara Morrison's phone number. Don't ask me how. Let's just say people put way too much information on social media and leave it there like they're inviting the whole world to their personal business. I sat in my car in the parking lot, staring at my phone, trying to figure out how exactly you call someone to tell them their husband is cheating without sounding like a psycho or a prank caller. Finally, I just dialed. Rip the Band-Aid off, right? It rang 3 times. Then hello. Her voice was warm, professional, with just a hint of confusion because obviously she didn't recognize the number. Hi. Is this Mara Morrison? I asked, suddenly aware that I hadn't actually planned what I was going to say beyond the opening line. Yes, this is she. Who's calling? I took a breath. My name is Mason. Mason Porter. We've never met, but we have something in common that I think we should talk about. It involves your husband. There was a pause. The kind of pause that stretches out long enough to make you wonder if the person on the other end hung up or died or spontaneously combusted. Then, what about my husband? Her voice had changed. Less warm, more guarded. She knew. Not the details maybe, But somewhere in her gut, she knew that this call wasn't good news. Women always know. It's like they have this sixth sense that detects bullshit from 3 miles away. They just sometimes choose to ignore it because the truth is scarier than the comfortable lie. Look, this is gonna sound crazy, and I promise I'm not some weirdo or a scammer or anything like that, I said, talking fast because I could feel her about to hang up. But I think our spouses are having an affair. My wife works at Hutchinson and Reed. Derek Morrison is her boss. And yesterday I watched them have coffee together at Catalyst, and it was not the kind of coffee that's covered in the employee handbook, if you know what I mean. Another pause. Longer this time. I could hear her breathing, could practically hear her brain working through this information, deciding whether to believe the random stranger on the phone or hang up and pretend this conversation never happened. How do I know you're not just some crazy person? She finally asked, but her voice cracked a little on the word crazy, and I knew she was already halfway to believing me. Because crazy people don't usually have photos, I said. I've got pictures from yesterday. Him and my wife at the coffee shop. Him coming home to you. I followed him. I know that sounds insane, and maybe it is, but I needed to know who he was. And when I saw you kiss him in the driveway, when I saw that he had this whole life with you, I realized you deserve to know what he's doing when he's supposedly working late. Silence. Then, send me the photos. I did. Right there, sitting in my car, I texted her 3 pictures that told the whole story. Derek and my wife laughing at the coffee shop, her touching his arm, him holding her hand, and then one of him and Mara in their driveway, looking like a couple in a life insurance commercial, completely oblivious to the fact that their marriage was about to become a case study in irony. My phone rang 30 seconds later. Where can we meet? She asked, and her voice was different now. Harder, like steel wrapped in silk. This was a woman who'd just had her worst suspicions confirmed and was already moving into action mode instead of falling apart mode. I liked her immediately. There's a park on Riverside Drive. Quiet. Public enough that you won't think I'm gonna murder you, but private enough that we can talk, I suggested. 2 hours. I'll be there. She hung up before I could respond, which was fair. I'd just blown up her life via phone call. She probably needed those 2 hours to process, to rage, to cry, or to do whatever people do when they find out their spouse is a lying piece of garbage with good credit and a nice watch. I showed up 15 minutes early because I'm anxious like that, and spent the time sitting on a bench watching joggers and dog walkers go by, all of them probably dealing with their own drama, but at least having the decency to do it in private instead of involving strangers via phone calls. She arrived exactly on time, which told me she was the kind of person who valued punctuality even when her life was imploding. She was wearing jeans and a simple blue sweater, her hair down now instead of in that ponytail, and she was carrying a travel mug that probably said something inspirational on it like, "World's most undervalued wife," though I couldn't see the actual text from where I was sitting. I stood up as she approached, and we did that awkward thing where neither of us knew whether to shake hands or just stand there like 2 people who'd matched on the world's worst dating app. "Mason?" she asked, even though it was pretty obvious it was me since I was the only person standing around looking like I was waiting for someone. "That's me," I said. "Mara." She nodded, and we sat down on the bench, both of us staring straight ahead at first like we were strangers on a bus who accidentally made eye contact, and now had to pretend the other person didn't exist. "So," she said finally, "tell me everything." And I did. I told her about my wife pulling away, about the coffee shop, about following Derek home, about realizing he'd been lying to everyone. I showed her more photos on my phone, and with each one, I could see her face getting tighter, her jaw clenching harder, her knuckles going white around that travel mug. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "I suspected something was off. He's been distant, working late all the time, showering as soon as he gets home, which he never used to do. All the classic signs, you know. But I kept telling myself I was being paranoid, that I was one of those crazy wives who sees cheating everywhere." She laughed, but it was bitter. Turns out I wasn't crazy enough. "Yeah, well, my wife's been treating me like I'm radioactive for months," I said. "Now I know why. Can't exactly touch your husband with affection when you're too busy planning coffee dates with your boss." Mara turned to look at me for the first time, really look at me, and I saw something in her eyes that matched what I was feeling, not just anger or hurt, but this cold, calculating determination. So what do you want to do about it? She asked. Honestly, I want them to face consequences, I said. Not in some crazy, key their cars kind of way, but real consequences. The kind where they can't just sweep this under the rug and move on like nothing happened. She nodded slowly, and I could see the wheels turning. Derek's company has a strict policy about relationships between supervisors and subordinates. It's a firing offense. At minimum, it's grounds for disciplinary action and transfer. So if someone were to report this to HR, I said, letting the sentence hang there, it would be investigated. Thoroughly. She smiled, and it wasn't a happy smile. It was the smile of someone who'd just figured out how to win a game they didn't even know they were playing. I know people in HR. We're friendly. We have drinks sometimes. I've been to the company holiday parties for 12 years. We make a pretty good team for two people who just met, I said. Trauma bonding, she replied. It's very efficient. She took a sip from her mug, which I could now see actually did say something on it. Nevertheless, she persisted. Perfect. We talked for another hour, making plans, comparing notes, building a strategy that felt less like revenge and more like justice with really good timing. We exchanged numbers, agreed to keep each other updated, and made a pact that we'd handle this like adults. Cold, calculating adults who were done being played for fools. As we were about to leave, I said, you know, if someone had told me a week ago that I'd be plotting corporate espionage with a stranger in a park, I would have said they were nuts. Mara smiled. A real smile this time, small but genuine. If someone had told me my husband was cheating with his subordinate, I would have said they had the wrong guy. Derek's too boring to have an affair. She shook her head. Guess boring people surprise you. Revenge? I asked, testing the word. She considered it for a moment, then shook her head. No. Closure. But I'm not against applause when this all goes down. We shook hands then, like business partners sealing a deal, which I guess we were. Partners in the business of ending our respective marriages with dignity and making sure the people who betrayed us didn't get to just walk away clean. I'll call you tomorrow, she said. We'll coordinate timing. Make sure we're both ready. Sounds like a plan. She walked to her car, a sensible Honda, because of course she was the responsible one while her husband drove around in his midlife crisis BMW. I watched her go, and I realized something. I wasn't alone in this anymore. I had an ally. Someone who understood exactly what I was going through because she was going through it too. It felt professional, clinical even, but it was about to get very, very personal. At exactly 6 p.m. on a perfectly ordinary Wednesday, because dramatic revelations should happen on the most boring day of the week for maximum ironic effect, Mara knocked on my door. I'd spent the entire day at work pretending to care about reports and emails while actually running through the plan in my head about 17,000 times, making sure every detail was perfect. This wasn't something you could half-ass. This was theater, and we were about to put on the performance of a lifetime. I opened the door, and there she was, looking calm and composed in dark jeans and a gray blazer like she was attending a business meeting instead of about to detonate two marriages simultaneously. She was holding a folder, the evidence, all printed out and organized because Mara was apparently the kind of person who color-coded her revenge. You ready for this? I asked, letting her in. I've been ready since I found a receipt for jewelry in his car 3 months ago that I never received, she said, walking into my living room and setting the folder down on the coffee table like it was a briefcase full of nuclear codes. Where's your wife? Still at work. She texted me an hour ago saying she'd be home by 6:15. Traffic on the interstate, apparently. I made air quotes around traffic because at this point, everything my wife said sounded like a lie, even when she was probably telling the truth. Derek thinks I'm at book club, Mara said, and something about the way she said it made me laugh. Here we were, two betrayed spouses, and we were both using the same excuses our partners probably used when they were sneaking around. The irony was so thick you could spread it on toast. We sat down on the couch, and for a minute, neither of us said anything. This was it, the point of no return. Once my wife walked through that door and saw Mara sitting in our living room, there was no taking this back, no pretending it never happened, no smoothing things over with apologies and promises to work on the marriage. This was the nuclear option, and we both had our fingers on the button. You know what's weird? I said, breaking the silence. I'm not even nervous. I thought I'd be freaking out right now, but I just feel calm. Mara nodded. That's because you already grieved the marriage. You've been grieving it for months, watching it die in slow motion. This is just making it official." She was right. I'd been mourning my marriage since that first flinch in the kitchen, maybe even before that. This wasn't an ending. It was just the acknowledgement that things had ended a long time ago, and we'd all been too cowardly or comfortable to admit it. At 6:17, because my wife was never on time for anything except apparently coffee dates with her boss, I heard her car pull into the driveway. Keys jingling. The front door opening. Her usual sigh that she did every time she came home, like walking into her own house, was somehow exhausting. "Mason," she called out, probably expecting me to be in the kitchen or the guest room or anywhere except sitting in the living room with a stranger who was about to ruin her entire week. "In here," I called back, and I heard her footsteps on the hardwood floor, getting closer. She walked into the living room, still looking at her phone, probably texting Derek about how she'd successfully made it home without her idiot husband suspecting anything. Then she looked up. Her face did this thing that I wish I'd recorded because it was absolutely priceless. Her eyes went wide, her mouth dropped open, and all the color drained from her face like someone had pulled a plug and her blood just decided to evacuate. She looked at Mara, then at me, then back at Mara, her brain clearly trying to process what was happening and coming up with error messages. "Who is she?" she yelled, and her voice cracked on the last word, which would have been satisfying if this whole thing wasn't so pathetically predictable. I smiled, actually smiled, like I was hosting a dinner party and introducing guests. "Honey, meet Mara Morrison. Mara, this is my wife, whose name you already know because I've complained about her extensively over the past few days." My wife's jaw hit the floor so hard I'm pretty sure it left a dent. Even gravity said, "Ouch," and tried to look away out of respect for her dignity, which was currently circling the drain. "Morrison," my wife repeated, and I could see the exact moment it clicked. Her face went from confused to horrified to caught red-handed in about 2 seconds flat. "Wait, you're Derek's wife," Mara finished, her voice calm and cold like she was reading a weather report about someone else's disaster. "Yes." Surprised? "Don't be. Mason and I have been comparing notes." Mara pulled out her phone with the efficiency of a prosecutor presenting evidence to a jury. She started scrolling through photos, my wife and Derek at the coffee shop, texting screenshots, restaurant receipts, all organized chronologically like a timeline of terrible decisions. "That's not. We were just. It's not what it looks like," my wife stammered, running through the greatest hits of cheater excuses like she was reading from a script that every guilty person in history has used. "Oh, it's exactly what it looks like," I said, standing up and crossing my arms. "Unless you're going to tell me that holding hands with your married boss over $7 lattes is part of some new corporate team-building exercise I haven't heard about." She tried a different approach, switching tactics like a politician in a losing debate. "It was just friendly. We're friends. Derek's been mentoring me at work." "Mentoring," Mara repeated, and she said the word like it tasted bad. "Is that what we're calling it now? Because I've seen the text messages, sweetheart. Derek's not great at deleting things. And unless I can't stop thinking about you is the new corporate motto at Hutchinson and Reed. I think we can drop the mentorship story." My wife's face cycled through about 15 different emotions. Panic, anger, embarrassment, more panic. She looked at me like I was the villain in this scenario, like I'd somehow wronged her by discovering her affair and having the audacity to confront her about it with witnesses. "This is crazy," she said, her voice going shrill. "You followed me? You stalked my boss? That's psychotic, Mason." "Psychotic would be pretending I didn't see what I saw," I said calmly, enjoying this way more than I probably should have. This is just efficient. Call it what you want, but at the end of the day, you got caught. And unlike you, I didn't need to lie about where I was or who I was with to figure out the truth." She turned to Mara, maybe thinking she could find sympathy there, some kind of woman-to-woman understanding. "Look, I don't know what he told you, but he told me the truth," Mara interrupted, standing up now too. "And then he showed me proof. And then I went through my husband's phone and found even more proof. So unless you're about to tell me that all of this is some elaborate deepfake conspiracy, I suggest you save your breath." My wife stuttered through every excuse in the book: charity work, company projects, stress relief, therapy recommendations from Derek, ghost of Christmas past. Probably would have blamed the moon cycle if she thought we'd buy it. Each excuse was more desperate than the last, and watching her scramble was like watching someone try to put out a fire with gasoline. "We never slept together," she finally shouted, like that was somehow the trump card that would make everything okay. I laughed, actually laughed out loud, the kind of laugh that comes from the depths of your soul when something is so absurd it breaks your brain. "Oh, well, in that case, let me just cancel this whole intervention. Honey, you only emotionally cheated with your married boss. That's totally fine. My bad." Mara wasn't laughing, though. She was just watching my wife with this expression of pure disgust, like she was looking at something she found stuck to the bottom of her shoe. "You know what the worst part is?" Mara said quietly. "It's not even the affair. It's the lying. The sneaking around. The fact that you both looked at your spouses every single day and chose to betray us while pretending everything was normal." I walked over to the coffee table and picked up a glass of water I'd poured earlier, because hydration is important, even during emotional warfare. I took a sip, letting the silence stretch out uncomfortably, watching my wife squirm under the weight of her own terrible choices. "So here's how this is gonna go," I said finally, setting the glass down with deliberate care. "You're going to pack your things. Tonight. Right now, actually. You're going to leave, and you're going to figure out where you're staying, because it's not here. Not anymore." "You can't just kick me out," she protested. "This is my house, too. Actually, the house is in my name because your credit was garbage when we bought it," I reminded her pleasantly. "But nice try. And before you start crying about your rights or whatever, just remember that I have photographic evidence of your affair with your supervisor, which I'm sure a lawyer would find very interesting during divorce proceedings." She opened her mouth to argue, but Mara cut her off. "And I'll be filing for divorce too, and reporting this to HR at Hutchinson and Reed, because last I checked, supervisor-subordinate relationships violate company policy. So you might want to start updating your resume." My wife looked between us, and I could see it finally sinking in. This wasn't a fight she could win. This wasn't something she could talk her way out of or explain away or minimize until we all just agreed to forget about it. This was real consequences for real actions, and she was about to learn what accountability felt like. "You've been promoted," I said calmly, smiling like I'd just given her good news. "To single. Congratulations. You earned it." The silence that followed was absolutely beautiful. Sweet, delicious silence that tasted better than anything I'd experienced in months. No excuses, no explanations, no desperate attempts to rewrite history. Just quiet acceptance that the jig was up and the curtain was falling. Finally, my wife turned and ran upstairs, and I could hear her in the bedroom, slamming drawers and probably crying. Though honestly, I was too busy feeling relieved to care much about her emotional state. Mara looked at me and gave a small nod. "Well," she said, "that went exactly as planned." "Better, actually," I said. I didn't think she'd try the mentorship excuse. That was a nice touch. We both smiled, not happy smiles, but satisfied ones. The smiles of people who just finished a job well done and were ready to move on to the next chapter of their lives. She thundered up the stairs like a tornado with feelings, and for the next 30 minutes, Mara and I sat in my living room listening to the symphony of drawers slamming, hangers scraping, and what sounded like someone having a complete emotional breakdown set to the soundtrack of aggressive packing. At one point, something crashed, probably that ceramic vase her mother gave us that I always hated anyway, and Mara raised her eyebrows at me like, "Should we check on that?" But I just shook my head. Some things need to break, and honestly, that vase was ugly as hell. When she finally came back downstairs, she was dragging 2 suitcases that looked like they'd been packed by someone having a panic attack in the dark. Her eyes were red and puffy, her hair was a mess, and she had that wild look people get when they're running on pure adrenaline and poor life choices. She stopped at the bottom of the stairs and glared at both of us with the kind of hatred usually reserved for people who spoil TV shows or talk during movies. "You'll regret this," she spat out, her voice shaking with either rage or tears or both. "Both of you. You'll regret being so cruel." I stood up slowly, deliberately, and walked over to her with my hands in my pockets like I was the most relaxed person in the world. "You know what I actually regret?" I said conversationally. "I regret not doing this 6 months ago when I first noticed you pulling away. I regret wasting time trying to fix something you'd already decided to break. But this," I gestured around at the scene we'd just created, "this I'm gonna sleep real well about." "Where am I supposed to go?" she asked. and now she was playing the victim card, which was bold considering she'd just been caught red-handed in an affair with her married boss. I don't know. Your sister's place? A hotel? Derek's BMW? Honestly, that's a you problem now, I said, channeling every ounce of not my circus, not my monkey's energy I could muster. But I can tell you where you're not going, and that's back upstairs into what used to be our bedroom. She looked at Mara, maybe hoping for some female solidarity or sympathy, but Mara just smiled that cold smile she perfected over the last hour and said, "Don't look at me. I'm dealing with my own cheating spouse situation. You two can carpool to Consequenceville for all I care." My wife grabbed her suitcases with the kind of dramatic flair that would have won her an Oscar if this were a movie and not just her life falling apart in real time. She dragged them to the door, struggling because she'd apparently overpacked, shocker, and turned around one last time. "You know what? I hope you're happy together," she said, her voice dripping with venom and the implication that Mara and I were somehow the real villains in this story. "We're not together, you walnut," I said, unable to help myself. "We're just two people who got cheated on by your boyfriend and decided to compare notes. Not everything is a romance. Sometimes it's just shared trauma and good timing. Whatever helps you sleep at night," she muttered, yanking open the door. "Actually, not having a cheater in my bed is what's going to help me sleep at night," I called after her. "That, and maybe some melatonin. I hear it works wonders." She slammed the door so hard the windows rattled, and then we heard her struggling with the suitcases down the front steps, cursing under her breath. Her car door slammed, the engine started, and then she was gone, leaving nothing but the smell of her perfume and the faint echo of terrible decisions. I turned to Mara, and we both just stood there for a second in the sudden quiet. Then she started laughing. Not a mean laugh, but the kind of slightly hysterical laugh people do when they've just been through something intense and their brain doesn't know how else to process it. "That was," she started, trying to find the words. "Incredible," I offered. "Satisfying. Better than therapy. All of the above," she said, wiping her eyes. "God, I needed that. I needed to see his face when he realizes his whole life is about to implode." "Speaking of which," I said, pulling out my phone, "what time does Derek usually get home?" "Around 7:30. If he's actually coming straight from work and not making detours to coffee shops with subordinates," she said, her voice hardening again. I looked at the time. 6:53. "You should probably head home. Get there before he does. That way you can have everything set up nice for him." She nodded, grabbing her purse and the folder of evidence. "I'll text you after. Let you know how it goes. I'll be waiting with popcorn," I said, walking her to the door. She paused on the porch and turned back to me. "Thanks, Mason, for calling me, for not just letting this slide. We deserved better than what they gave us," I said simply. "Sometimes you gotta take out your own trash." She smiled, a real smile this time, and headed to her sensible Honda. I watched her drive away, and then I closed the door and stood in my suddenly very quiet house. It felt different already. Lighter, like someone had opened all the windows and let out air that had been going stale for months. The next morning, I woke up in the guest room, which was now just going to be my room, I guess, and felt more rested than I had in weeks. No tension, no tiptoeing around someone's mood, no wondering if today would be the day she'd finally just admit she didn't want to be married anymore. Just peace. Glorious, uncomplicated peace. I made coffee, sat at the kitchen table, and called the HR department at Hutchinson and Reed. A woman named Patricia answered, sounding way too cheerful for 8:30 in the morning. "Hi, Patricia. This is Mason Porter. I'm calling to report a policy violation involving 2 employees at your company," I said, keeping my voice professional and calm like I was ordering a pizza instead of potentially ending 2 careers. "Oh," she said, her cheerfulness dimming considerably. "What kind of violation?" "The kind where a senior vice president is having an inappropriate relationship with someone he directly supervises," I said. "Derek Morrison and my soon-to-be ex-wife. I have documentation if you need it." There was a pause while she processed that bomb. Yes, we would need documentation. This is a serious allegation." "I understand. I can email everything over within the hour. Photos, text message screenshots, the works. My ex-wife's name is Rachel Porter. She's in your marketing department." "Mr. Porter, I appreciate you bringing this to our attention," Patricia said, and now she sounded like she was already mentally preparing for the nightmare of paperwork and investigations this was going to create. We take these matters very seriously. I'll need to forward this to our ethics committee and our legal department. You do what you need to do, I said pleasantly. I'm just a concerned citizen making sure company policy is being followed. Have a great day, Patricia. I hung up and immediately forwarded all the evidence to the HR email address Patricia had given me. Photos, timestamps, everything organized and labeled like I was submitting a college thesis on how to catch your spouse being trash, a case study. An hour later, my phone buzzed with a text from Mara. Derek's been suspended pending investigation. He's losing his mind, currently yelling about lawsuits and privacy violations. I'm enjoying my coffee and watching him spiral. This is therapeutic. Me. That was efficient. Mara. I'm a woman who believes in customer service. When I deliver consequences, I deliver them on time and under budget. I sent back a laughing emoji, the honest kind, not the sarcastic, I'm dead inside, one I'd been using for months whenever my wife sent me those passive-aggressive texts about forgetting to buy milk or whatever minor infraction I'd committed that day. Me, how are you doing? Really? Mara, honestly? I'm okay. Better than okay. I feel like I can breathe for the first time in months. Derek's in the guest room. I've called a lawyer, and I'm pretty sure this is the beginning of my villain arc. Me. Villain arcs are underrated. Very empowering. Mara, right? I should have been a villain years ago. Heroes are exhausting, and nobody appreciates them. I smiled at my phone, feeling that weird camaraderie you get with someone when you've been through battle together. Even if the battle was just exposing two cheaters and watching their lives implode in real time. It wasn't romance, wasn't even really friendship yet. Just two people who understood exactly what the other was going through because they were living it simultaneously. The rest of the day, I got texts from various people. Jerry saying he heard through the grapevine that Rachel had moved in with her sister and was telling everyone I'd forced her out. Tom from the barbecue awkwardly asking if I was okay. Even my mom calling, because apparently news travels fast when your marriage explodes. To everyone, I gave the same answer. I'm good. Really good. Better than I've been in a long time. And the crazy thing? It was true. I wasn't just saying it to make people feel better or to pretend I was handling things well. I actually felt good. Lighter. Like I'd been carrying around a backpack full of someone else's problems and finally realized I could just put it down and walk away. That night, I ordered pizza, watched a movie I actually wanted to watch instead of whatever reality TV garbage Rachel always insisted on, and went to bed at a reasonable hour in my own room that smelled like my cologne and not her perfume. And I slept like a baby who'd just discovered the concept of boundaries and decided they were pretty great actually. A week later, 7 glorious days of sleeping peacefully, eating what I wanted, and not having to explain my whereabouts to someone who'd spent months lying about theirs. Rachel showed up at my door with a pie. An actual pie. Like we were living in some 1950s sitcom where baked goods fixed broken marriages and infidelity could be swept under the rug with the right amount of whipped cream and apologies. I was in the middle of my second coffee, wearing sweatpants and a t-shirt that said, "I'm not arguing. I'm just explaining why I'm right." A gift from Jerry that had never been more appropriate when the doorbell rang. I looked through the peephole, and there she was, holding what appeared to be an apple pie and wearing this expression that was probably supposed to look apologetic, but mostly just looked uncomfortable, like she'd eaten something that disagreed with her and was trying to smile through the stomach cramps. I debated not answering, just standing there in silence until she gave up and left, taking her weaponized pie with her. But curiosity got the better of me. Plus, I wanted to see what kind of manipulation tactics she'd try now that the initial shock had worn off, and she'd had time to workshop her approach with her sister and whatever enabling friends she had left. I opened the door, but didn't step aside to let her in. Just stood there in the doorway like a bouncer at a club who'd already decided you weren't getting past the velvet rope. "Hey," she said, her voice doing that soft, vulnerable thing that women do when they're trying to seem harmless and reasonable. "Can we talk? Like adults?" I almost laughed. "We are adults," I said, leaning against the doorframe. "That's exactly why I'm not pretending to forget what happened just because you showed up with carbs." She held up the pie like it was evidence in her defense. "I made your favorite. Apple, with that lattice crust you like. I thought we could sit down and just talk. Really talk. Without all the anger and drama." My favorite is actually cherry, I said, because it was, and she would have known that if she'd paid attention to literally anything about me in the last 3 years. But points for effort, I guess. Very thoughtful of you to beg for the husband you cheated on. Her face twitched, just a little, but I caught it. That micro-expression that said she was already getting annoyed that I wasn't playing along with her redemption arc. Mason, please. Can I just come in? 5 minutes. That's all I'm asking. I considered it for exactly 2 seconds, then stepped out onto the porch instead, pulling the door mostly closed behind me. Porch only, I said firmly. New rule. You want to talk? We talk out here where the neighbors can see us, and I can go back inside whenever I decide this conversation is over. She blinked at me like her Wi-Fi was buffering, trying to process that I wasn't going to make this easy for her. Are you serious right now? Deadly, I said, crossing my arms. You wanted to talk like adults? Adults have boundaries. This is mine. Porch or nothing. She let out this dramatic sigh that could have powered a small wind turbine and sat down on the porch steps, setting the pie next to her like a sad consolation prize no one wanted. I stayed standing, leaning against the railing, maintaining my position of power in this negotiation I hadn't agreed to participate in. I miss you, she started, and I had to actively stop myself from rolling my eyes so hard they'd get stuck that way. I miss us. I miss our life together. Which part? I asked conversationally. The part where you were sleeping with your boss, or the part where you treated me like I was radioactive every time I tried to touch you? I'm curious which version of US you're nostalgic for, because from where I'm standing, neither sounds particularly worth missing. I wasn't sleeping with him, she insisted, like that technicality somehow made everything fine. We never actually. Yeah. You never slept together. You just had an emotional affair, held hands, texted constantly, and lied to me for months about where you were and who you were with. I interrupted. That's so much better. You're absolutely right. I should definitely take you back based on that totally convincing defense. She tried to reach for my arm. That same manipulative touch she probably used on Derek to make him think he was special, but I stepped back before she made contact. Her hand hovered in the air for a second before dropping back to her lap like a dead fish. Don't, I said simply. That doesn't work anymore. You really love your rules, don't you? She snapped. And there it was, the real Rachel, breaking through the carefully constructed nice girl facade like the Kool-Aid man through a wall. Everything has to be your way now. Your boundaries, your conditions, your timeline. Yeah, I said, not even trying to hide my smile. Turns out when you rebuild your life after someone tries to burn it down, you get to make the rules. Funny how that works. You're being unreasonable, she said, pulling out her favorite weapon, making me feel like I was the problem, like my totally justified response to her betrayal was somehow the real issue here. No, I'm being self-aware, I corrected her. There's a difference. Self-aware people recognize when they're being manipulated and choose not to participate. Unreasonable people would be out here yelling and throwing things. I'm just standing here, calmly declining your invitation to get hurt again. She stood up then, brushing off her jeans with aggressive swipes like she was trying to brush off the reality that this wasn't going according to her plan. Fine. You know what? Fine. But you're going to regret this, Mason. You're going to regret not forgiving me when you had the chance. I smiled then, a real, genuine smile that came from somewhere deep in my soul where I'd apparently stored all my self-respect for safekeeping. And you'll regret thinking forgiveness comes with home delivery, I said. Forgiveness isn't something you can just order up like pizza when you decide you want it. It's earned. Through time, through changed behavior, through actual accountability. Not through showing up with a pie and puppy dog eyes and hoping I'm stupid enough to fall for it. I came here to apologize, she said, her voice rising. No, you came here to see if you could manipulate me into taking you back without actually having to do any real work or face any real consequences. I said, my voice steady. There's a difference. A real apology would acknowledge what you did wrong, take responsibility for it, and accept that there are consequences you can't negotiate your way out of. This, I gestured at her and the sad pie. This is just you testing the waters to see if I'm still the same pushover who'd accept breadcrumbs and call it a meal. Her face went through several emotions. Anger, embarrassment, frustration, before settling on something that looked like defeat mixed with resentment. Not a good look, but an honest one at least. I can't believe you're throwing away 10 years of marriage over this. I'm not throwing it away, I said calmly. You threw it away when you decided your boss was more interesting than your husband. I'm just taking out the trash. There's a difference. She grabbed the pie, gripping it so hard I thought she might throw it at me, which would have been entertaining but also would have ruined my t-shirt, and marched down the steps toward her car. Halfway there, she turned around one more time, mascara starting to run because apparently she'd added crying to her performance. I hope you're happy, she said, and it came out bitter, like the opposite of a blessing. Getting there, I said honestly. It's a process, but I'm making progress. Thanks for asking. I meant it sarcastically. I know. I chose to take it literally. It's called boundary setting. My therapist is very proud. She made this strangled noise that was half sob, half scream, through the pie in her passenger's seat. Hopefully it survived, because someone should enjoy it even if it wasn't going to be me, and peeled out of my driveway like she was auditioning for Fast and Furious, suburban desperation. I stood on the porch for a minute, watching her taillights disappear, and waited for the guilt to hit. Waited for that voice in my head that said I should have been nicer, should have heard her out, should have given her another chance because that's what good people do, and marriage is about forgiveness and all that Hallmark card nonsense. But it never came. Instead, I just felt relief. Pure, uncomplicated relief that I'd held my ground and not let her back in just because she showed up with baked goods and fake tears. Relief that I'd learned how to say no to people who didn't deserve yes. Relief that somewhere along the way, I'd grown a spine and decided to actually use it. I went back inside, poured myself another coffee, and texted Jerry. Ex-wife just showed up with a pie trying to reconcile. Told her porch-only policy. She left mad. Jerry, did you at least get to keep the pie? Me. Nope. She took it with her. Probably going to eat her feelings in her sister's driveway. Jerry, her loss. Literally and figuratively. Proud of you, man. Me. Thanks. Therapy is expensive, but apparently worth it. Later that afternoon, I found out through the neighborhood kid who was weirdly plugged into local gossip that Rachel had given the pie to Mrs. Henderson next door. Mrs. Henderson's grandson had tried it and reported back that it was kind of dry, actually. I texted that information to Mara because she was the only person who would appreciate the poetic justice of Rachel's reconciliation pie being objectively disappointing. Mara, even her baked goods are half-assed. This is beautiful. Me. The universe has a sense of humor. Mara. The universe is doing stand-up comedy at this point. How are you holding up? Me. Better than the pie, apparently. You. Mara. Derek's lawyer sent me a very aggressive letter about harassment because I reported him to HR. My lawyer sent back an even more aggressive letter about evidence and violations of company policy. It's like watching two dogs bark at each other through a fence. Me. Entertainment value. High. Mara, exactly. I'm learning that divorce is 90% paperwork and 10% wondering why you didn't do this sooner. That night, I ordered Chinese food. The good kind, not the compromise because someone doesn't like spicy food kind, and ate it while watching a documentary about space that Rachel would have hated because she thought space was boring and pointless. And you know what? Space wasn't boring. Space was fascinating, and I was finally free enough to enjoy it. Mara and I started texting regularly after that, which sounds weird when you explain it to other people. Yeah, I'm friends with my ex-wife's affair partner's wife, but made perfect sense to us. We were two survivors with matching scars, and there's something about shared trauma that cuts through all the normal awkward getting-to-know-you phases and jumps straight to the part where you can say whatever you're thinking without fear of judgment. Our first official hangout that wasn't revenge-related happened on a Saturday morning. She texted me at 8 asking if I wanted to grab coffee, and I said yes before my brain could overthink it and make it weird. We met at a local place, not Catalyst, because neither of us wanted to relive that particular crime scene, and ordered drinks that were reasonably priced and served by people who didn't act like they were curing cancer with espresso. So this is what normal people do, Mara said, settling into her chair with a latte that had actual foam art instead of whatever pretentious nonsense the hipster places did. They just hang out, without plotting revenge or gathering evidence. Wild concept. I agreed, taking a sip of my black coffee. I almost don't know what to talk about when I'm not comparing notes on our spouse's terrible life choices. We ended up talking for 2 hours about everything except Derek and Rachel. Work, hobbies, That new documentary series everyone was watching, why grocery stores put the milk in the back. Normal stuff that normal people talked about when they weren't navigating the aftermath of simultaneous divorces. It was easy, comfortable, like talking to someone who just got you without needing extensive backstory or emotional footnotes. After that, it became a thing. We'd meet up once or twice a week, sometimes for coffee, sometimes for walks in the park where we'd first formed our alliance. No pressure, no expectations, just two people who'd been through hell and decided they liked each other's company on the way out. One afternoon, we were walking around the lake near her house. She'd kicked Derek out by then, so she actually seemed relaxed in her own neighborhood when she brought up something that had apparently been bothering her. "People keep telling me I should fight for my marriage," she said, watching a duck family paddle by like they had their lives figured out better than any of us. My mom, some friends from church, even my hairdresser has opinions about it. They keep saying, marriage is sacred, that I should try counseling, that everyone makes mistakes. I thought about that for a second, watching the ducks do their thing. You know what fighting to keep trash doesn't make you. I finally said. She looked at me, eyebrow raised. What? Loyal. It makes you a raccoon. She stopped walking and just stared at me for a beat. Then she started laughing. That real, from the belly kind of laugh that people do when something hits them exactly right. She laughed so hard, she almost dropped her coffee, and a jogger passing by gave us a concerned look like we might be having some kind of episode. A raccoon, she repeated, wiping her eyes. Oh my God, that's perfect. That's exactly what it would be. Just me, digging through garbage, trying to find something worth keeping. Right? Like, congratulations, you successfully defended a dumpster, I said. What's the prize? More garbage. She shook her head, still grinning. I'm using that next time my mom brings it up. Sorry, Mom. I've decided not to be a raccoon today. That became our thing, finding humor in the absurdity of it all. Not the mean kind of humor that was really just bitterness in disguise, but genuine laughter at how ridiculous people could be, how predictable the advice was, how everyone suddenly became a marriage expert when your marriage was falling apart. We didn't need drama. We'd had enough drama to last us through retirement. What we needed was peace. And somehow, we'd found it in each other. Not in a romantic way. Neither of us was ready for that, and honestly, it would have ruined what we had. We needed friendship, the kind where you could say, I'm having a really bad day, and the other person just showed up with coffee and didn't try to fix it or make it about them. She became my calm, the person who understood without needing explanation, who'd been through the same fire and come out the other side still standing. And apparently, I became her comic relief, the person who could make her laugh about situations that should have made us both bitter and angry. One evening, we were sitting on a bench watching the sunset. Yeah, we'd become those people, but in our defense, the sunsets were actually pretty great when she said something that stuck with me. You know what's weird? She asked. I'm happier now than I was 6 months ago when I thought my marriage was fine. That's because ignorance isn't actually bliss, I said. It's just ignorance with better PR. She smiled at that. Derek's lawyer keeps pushing for mediation, keeps saying we should work it out like adults. And every time I get one of those emails, I just think about how I'm already working it out. By leaving. Exactly. Sometimes working it out means working yourself out of a bad situation. I said, people act like giving up on a marriage is failure, but staying in one that's killing you slowly? That's not success. That's just slow suicide with paperwork. We sat there quietly for a while, watching the sky turn orange and pink, and I realized something important. For the first time in years, I wasn't planning my next move or worrying about someone else's feelings or trying to fix something that was broken beyond repair. I was just existing, peacefully, with a friend who got it. And for once in my life, I slept fine knowing tomorrow would be more of the same, calm, simple, unbothered. No drama, no games, just good coffee and clean air. Derek lost his job 3 months after the HR investigation concluded. Turns out sleeping with subordinates, or almost sleeping with them, whatever version of the story he was selling, was exactly as bad for your career as company policy suggested it would be. He tried to spin it as mutual resignation, but everyone knew the truth. Corporate doesn't let you mutually resign when you've violated ethics policies and created liability issues. They just escort you out with a cardboard box and wishes for your future endeavors that nobody actually means. Rachel lost her comfortable setup when Derek couldn't be her sugar daddy anymore and his wife cleaned him out in divorce court. Last I heard, she was working at some startup that paid half what Hutchinson and Reed did and living with her sister, who apparently wasn't thrilled about the long-term roommate situation. The affair that was supposed to be her upgrade turned into her downgrade, which felt like the universe finally balancing its books. Me? I gained something way more valuable than revenge or vindication. I gained silence. And let me tell you, silence is priceless when you've spent years listening to someone's excuses, complaints, and the sound of your own dignity being chipped away one passive-aggressive comment at a time. I fixed my house, my peace, and my Spotify playlist. No more compromising on music. No more pretending I liked reality TV. No more walking on eggshells wondering if today would be the day she'd finally admit she checked out months ago. Just me, my space, and the beautiful quiet of not having to manage someone else's emotional chaos. Sometimes I think about that day. Me walking into my own living room with Mara, Rachel's face draining of color, her voice cracking as she yelled, "Who is she?" Like she was the victim in a story where she'd been cast as the villain. I remember the look on her face when I said, calm as Sunday morning, "Meet your boss's wife." That silence should have won an Oscar. Best supporting silence in a drama. The kind of quiet that speaks louder than any scripted confrontation ever could. Now, when people ask how I moved on, and they do ask, because apparently everyone's fascinated by divorce when it's not theirs, I give them the same answer every time. I didn't move on. I just moved up. Up from being treated like an afterthought. Up from accepting breadcrumbs of affection. Up from believing that loyalty meant staying in something that was slowly killing who I used to be. Mara and I still grab coffee every week. Still laugh about the absurdity of it all. She's dating now, some guy who owns a bookstore and has never cheated on anyone, which she says is a refreshingly low bar, but one she's grateful for anyway. I'm not there yet, but I'm getting there. Learning to trust again, learning to like myself again, learning that being alone is better than being with someone who makes you feel alone anyway. Every night, I brush my teeth beside the man in the mirror, and here's the thing. He's smiling now. Really smiling. Not that fake smile you give people when they ask how you're doing and you lie through your teeth. A real smile. The smile of someone who's calm, unbothered, and finally free. I look at that guy and think, you did it. You walked through fire and didn't let it burn you to ash. You chose yourself when everyone else chose comfort over truth. And every single night, that guy in the mirror looks back at me and nods. Because we both know the truth now. The best revenge isn't hurting the people who hurt you. It's becoming so completely fine without them that their absence becomes irrelevant. And brother, I've never been more irrelevantly happy in my entire life.